America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Alfredo Ortiz, CEO of Job Creators Network.
And you can subscribe to the show at Salem Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcast from. Alfredo, wanted to spend a couple minutes talking to you about Biden's speech at the border. We had that poll come out earlier in February that showed that crime was really having an economic spillover with our small businesses. 30% of them said it was costing them more. And that's due to obviously crime in the cities due to woke DAs not enforcing laws, but also from the migrant crime we're seeing around the country. And it's amazing to me how the administration just seems so detached, and it's kind of like how they talk about their economic reports. They continue to point to the economic reports and tell everybody they should be feeling good about the economy and Bidenomics is working. They're looking at stats that are coming off of the Summer of Love during George Floyd riots and saying, see, you shouldn't feel like crime is up because it's down.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And I know that particular speech at the border was panned by I think it was the Border Patrol Union as well. Which really just kind of says it all. I mean, the guys who are actually on the front line, the men and women trying to protect our borders, just don't believe the guy anymore. They don't believe Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary. So it is kind of a joke at this point, but it's not really funny because obviously real crimes are being committed. And as you know, I'm here in Georgia. Just the other day, was the funeral for that UGA that happened on the UGA campus of that nursing student. Which was really truly unavoidable, and the mother just spoke out on that this morning. It really was an It really was an avoidable crime, and it's just a shame, that we don't have a president or a secretary that actually believe in securing our borders. I mean, and as you know, Elaine, it's something that we don't talk really at Job Creators Network much about border issues, but this border issue has not just become, about immigration. There really is the criminality and the bad elements really that are coming through that porous border, whether it's drug trafficking, human trafficking, or gun trafficking. It's all coming in, and unfortunately, it's actually landing in a lot of the communities that are in many cases, not actually, affluent areas, and that's where they're residing. They're staying in the schools, the MS-13 gangs, and so. It's really hurting our small businesses in a big way because there's a lot of the crime. You have people that are literally in the streets in front of their small businesses. This is really impacting across the board, across the country. And that's why I think it's also becoming the number one issue. Every time there is any kind of poll at this point, or when we have, a primary, for example, in Iowa and New Hampshire, and South Carolina, immigration now is the top issue. And again, I don't think it's immigration per se, but I think the issue is the porous border.
Yeah, 7.2 million people have come into the country under the Biden administration, and only recently have they even called it a crisis. It's like we're the only country that doesn't enforce their borders. And let me also say, as you know, as our listeners know, we are a small business advocacy organization. We don't talk about immigration. It's not an issue that we get involved in, but we're actually being pulled into it because of the impact on our small businesses and the communities. We have Carlos Ruiz out in Tucson, who told me that they call it a crime tax out there because of all the crime that they're experiencing. They see it as a tax on their businesses. So when you have a small business advocacy organization like us weighing into the immigration problem, I mean, I think it's an eyebrow raiser.
Now, to be fair, I mean, we can't necessarily point to every crime being driven by an immigration issue or porous border issue. I think a big part of this, too, is just the soft on crime agenda that the Democrats represent and all the lax DAs, the no cash bail, right? I mean, where it's literally a revolving door of criminals now. And so I think it's a combination. It's like a 1-2 punch. But it really is, I think, hurting our country overall. And so I think, when you look at the issues that it causes, plus, by the way, the drain on the resources, for Americans and their taxpayers. I mean, we have to take care of our people first. I mean, we really do. I mean, it's, we've got homeless vets, with mental illnesses that are all over the country. They're out there homeless, yet we're housing illegal immigrants, right? That didn't fight for our country, that aren't citizens of this country. And so I just don't think that's fair. And as you know, I mean, also, my parents are immigrants, so obviously I'm not anti-immigrant, but they came here the legal way, and they believed in our country, and they loved our country the moment they stepped into the country, right? And so, this is not an anti-immigrant issue, but it really is about taking care of our people first. I think you and I use the analogy. It's like when you get on a plane, and what's the one thing that they tell you when, if the oxygen goes down in the plane, that the mask will drop. What do they say? They say, put your mask on first before you help others, right? And I think it's in the same way. We need to put our mask on first before we help others.
Well, we have a new friend joining us today, so I'm excited for us to meet her, Mary Thomas, and we'll talk to her next. So we are joined, very excited to announce, by Mary Thomas. Mary is our new Chief Strategic Growth Officer, and she comes to JCN with 20 plus years of experience in conservative politics and pro-business policies. Her journey in advocacy includes serving in various leadership roles, such as her tenure at America First Legal Foundation and the Club for Growth Foundation. She also served as the Deputy Assistant Attorney General during Trump's presidency and as an advisor under Governor Rick Scott, my former governor. Mary, welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone.
Hi, Elaine. It's great to be here with you.
Well, I'm so glad you could join us and tell our audience about your background. Can you give us just a little bit of history and flavor for your background on working in the conservative movement? Obviously, you lived in Florida at one point since you worked under my former governor. So I think you've got such an interesting background. Our audience would love to hear about it.
Yes, absolutely. So I grew up in Florida. My parents are still there in the Tampa Bay area. I worked for Governor Scott, as you mentioned, in his general counsel's office, and was his general counsel at a state agency, the Department of Elder Affairs. From there, I actually ran for Congress in 2016, was endorsed by all the conservative groups, economically and socially conservative, narrowly lost by less than 1,000 votes, but then went to be an appointee of President Trump's at the Department of Justice. And then after that, served as the political director for Catholic Vote. I built out their grassroots operations, ran their political efforts, and then I was the policy director at the Club for Growth Foundation, building out the work that they were doing, including with a fellowship program that works with state legislators and gives them media training and many other things, and worked on many regulatory and policy issues. And then I was at America First Legal, and I was working with them on kind of building out the organization and fighting for freedom and in the courtroom. And then now I'm here at JCN.
Where'd you run for Congress?
I ran for Congress in the 2nd District in Florida, so North Florida, Florida 2.
Oh, okay. All right. Excellent. And America First Legal, Stephen Miller's group. What are some of the cases that you worked on there? Just to give our listeners a little bit of flavor for some of the things that group has worked on? I'm sure they've seen him on different shows on Fox.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing a lot of great work that is much needed in the conservative movement. So I think in the movement for a long time, conservatives have kind of worked on looking for the perfect case and the perfect set of facts to challenge a legal issue. But while we're doing that, our freedoms are really being taken from us every single day. And so the left, they do something called lawfare. And that's basically going in and challenging every single thing at any level of court that's being done. We're doing that where there's a legitimate basis, and we're really making strides. For example, there were two Biden administration federal government programs that were discriminating against whites and Asians in getting access to this federal money. We sued the Biden administration, and both of those programs were taken out. And they stopped doing those programs moving forward as well because of the risk of litigation. We're also involved with suing companies for discrimination against individuals, which is obviously a violation of the Civil Rights Act. And then one of our big cases, one of AFL's big cases, was they were sued. It's kind of a groundbreaking lawsuit. They sued some private entities that colluded with the federal government to censor the speech of millions of Americans on issues such as COVID, and basically to take a conservative speech off their network. So the government and these private entities were working together along with big tech.
Yep, JCN suffered some of that as well. We were blocked by YouTube for several weeks for a video that we put out. And interestingly enough, it was just actual footage from the violence that was occurring around the country, news footage. And we didn't make it. We didn't edit it. We just took the footage that was in the public domain and put it together of a couple cities around the country, and it was suppressed. Actually, we were blocked, and it was taken off on Twitter.
Yeah, it's very sad. You never thought this would be happening in our country. You know, our First Amendment rights, our freedom of speech, they're one of the most cherished rights that we have. And many of our other freedoms are based upon the right to free speech. So if, these entities are attacking the free speech rights of any American, they shouldn't be allowed to do that, and they should be held accountable. And the government should not be allowed to go basically collude with private entities to get around violating the First Amendment by having a private entity do the censorship. It's wrong, and we have to fight against it. So I'm glad that America First Legal and other groups are fighting against it.
Well, Mary, good morning. Thank you for joining our podcast. Really appreciate it. And welcome to the team. So we're very excited to have you.
Thank you.
I got a couple questions for you. The first one really is kind of drawing on your vast experience of working with conservative groups. What do you think is like the biggest reason why they're successful? And what can more groups like American First Legal and stuff like that, what can they do to even be more impactful, in your opinion?
Well, I think one of the most important things is, we have to get out there and really do things. If we say that we're going to do something, we need to follow through with what we're doing. If we say, we're going to fight against some sort of regulation or some sort of policy, just like JCN did with the student loan case and the vaccine mandate case, and just as AFL has done on many cases too, we need to kind of be aggressive and be willing to go out there and actually see things through and do action, not just write policy reports or amicus briefs. Those are all good, okay, but we need to take action, and we need to be more aggressive.
Do you think that this is what it's really come down to, just a bunch of lawyers suing a bunch of lawyers?
No, I don't think so. I mean, lawyers get a bad rap. I'm a lawyer, but there are good people and bad people in the world, no matter what they are. I don't think it's lawyers suing lawyers. I think it is people, lawyers, good lawyers, coming in to defend the rights of every single American. And, we have a lot of parents, they're fighting for their children with indoctrination that's going on in schools and schools are not focused on education. AFL would represent those parents and has helped them win cases and we've stepped in to be basically pro bono legal attorneys and back up people who need help. They're fighting for freedom. They're on the front lines every single day, and they need someone to back them up because the left has people to back them up. But unfortunately, we do not have those same set of resources on our side.
But the little guy has hope, whether it's a parent, whether it's a small business, because there are organizations like, the one you came from, AFL, or ours, for example, that did go to court defending these freedoms, right? I mean, the little guy has hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing is that we're at a point in our nation where if we don't stand up, we are very close to losing our country. So it's the duty of all of our Americans, patriotic Americans who love freedom, love our country, love the Constitution, to get up and stand up for what we believe in. And yes, if they are you standing up and you're attacked, there are groups out there, many, many groups that will work to defend you.
Well, Mary, we're so glad that you came to join us at JCN. I'd love for you to talk to our listeners about why. I mean, you obviously were with a very dynamic organization. They're great, and we admire all the work they've done. But what attracted you to JCN, and how are you going to shake things up here?
Well, what attracted me to JCN, I really like the work that you guys have done, and all that you've done really throughout the years, fighting for small businesses and Main Street. I mean, I think one of the main problems is that small businesses, they don't often have a voice. They're being impacted by, policies at the federal, state, and local levels. And unlike big businesses who can hire teams of lobbyists, small businesses don't have that same ability. And my parents lived the American dream, which I believe is something Job Creators Network is protecting every single day. They built a small business from the ground up, still working in that business today. But I think small businesses are really the vehicle that many people can use, many families, to lift themselves up in this country. It's such a wonderful thing that we have the ability to do that and the freedom to do that. And that needs to be defended because it really is under attack today.
You've worked in state government and the federal government. You come from a family of entrepreneurs. How do the principles of free market impact, small businesses? You've seen it. You've been on the entrepreneur side, the government side. When you've got excessive regulations, what's happening to our small businesses? When you've got excessive taxes and litigation, what's happening to our small businesses?
Yeah, small businesses are really suffering. I think anytime there's government intervention, most times when there's government intervention, there's going to be interference with the free market, and it hurts businesses. With regulations, as we were talking about these small businesses, large businesses can hire some, a lawyer or some other person to do their compliance for them. But these small business owners working 70 plus hours a week, they have to go and they have to comply with these regulations themselves. They have to do the, mountains of paperwork themselves. And that's taking away from them being able to actually grow their business, right? And actually provide services to the customer, to the American people. So it's very much a problem. And we very much worked on that during the Trump administration and in Governor Scott's administration, looking at regulations. I mean, basically going through the regulations of every single agency to make sure that they were not, burdensome, overly burdensome, and make sure that they weren't hurting small businesses. So I think we've had some great leaders that have taken some initiative in this regard, and we certainly need to do more work to cut down the red tape.
Yeah, I can attest to Governor Scott's success in the state of Florida too. He was a great governor. In
fact, under the Trump administration, because I know we're closely helping on this front as well. I think their goal was something like for every one regulation introduced, they're going to try to eliminate 7 or something like that. I think they end up doing for every one, I think they eliminated 25 or some amazing number like that. It really made a huge difference for small businesses because regulation, and especially over-regulation, I should say, is real killer. If you look at, what happened with Dodd-Frank, for example, It ended up killing thousands of community banks across our country. And community banks are really the lifeblood, the lifeline of our small businesses and lending to our small businesses. And so these unintended consequences, or one could argue probably intended consequences to our small businesses is pretty drastic. And so I think we need to make sure that in this new administration, hopefully we have a Republican administration that actually understands how these regulations hurt our small businesses. And so when you came on, we were right in the middle of helping, trying to push through the tax cuts or tax extension, I should say, that is now sitting in the Senate that extended some of the tax provisions that help so many of our small businesses across the country. What do you think of kind of how tax policy really does impact our small businesses, and why the Tax and Jobs Act was so beneficial, and why would the current administration, in terms of its basically increase of taxes, is actually so detrimental to our small businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think taxes for small businesses, just like for individuals, the more taxes you have, the less available capital income that you have to spend. And so small businesses, if they're getting taxed, they have to find a way to deal with these higher costs. So they either have to increase prices for consumers, or, some of them end up even shutting down. But, there's always something that you have to do. You're not able to grow and put your money back into your business because you have to give it back to the government for their frivolous spending. There are a lot of negative impacts of taxes, I would say, not only on small businesses, but on individuals as well.
I always laugh when I see politicians say, we're going to make those greedy corporations pay because they're greedy. And all I think is raise their taxes all you want. All they're going to do is raise the prices of their products, and the consumer is going to pay, because corporations don't pay taxes. Consumers pay taxes.
Well, that's another thing. Big corporations, they will likely not have to increase their prices as much as small corporations will, because they feel more of an impact from the taxes. So then that has problems for competition, and really, again, shuts small businesses out of the market to some degree. So it's definitely a big problem. It has to be looked at, and we have to get some relief for our small businesses if we want to keep the American dream, like my family had and many other families in this country had, alive and well, and allow people to open small businesses. We've got to, cut the red tape, make it easier.
Well, crime's been a big issue in the media, but also because, as you know, we did a poll in January of our small business owners. We've been talking about it for several weeks now, because it's been so impactful to hear that small businesses are really starting to feel crime through increased costs of paying for extra security to keep their employees and their customers safe, the loss of inventory on their shelves. And we're seeing it from, these woke DAs across the country who don't enforce the laws. So it's a revolving door, or they set these arbitrary levels of, it's okay if you steal up to $900, but if you go to 901, then we're going to arrest you. So they come back on a daily basis and steal up to $900. I've heard stories of criminals actually going around with a calculator to make sure they don't go over, actually $900 or whatever the number is in each city. And somehow people just, these woke DAs, and just think that these companies can just absorb it. And what we're seeing is they're closing and leaving. And then you've got the migrant crime coming across the border from our open borders. And so our small businesses are really taking it on the chin, much more so, I think, than big corporations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think when you're talking about, there's the crime that already exists in the US, and that's a problem. Just like you said, the DAs aren't prosecuting, many of the DAs aren't prosecuting the crime. So without any repercussions, people are going to continue to commit crimes. And unfortunately, sometimes many of them are heinous crimes. There could be instances of rape or murder, and these people are let back on the street to commit yet another crime, which is not the way it should be. And then we look at illegal immigration. Joe Biden, we had the most secure border under Donald Trump and the least amount of illegal immigration that we had for 45 years. And what we're seeing now is that we have, 9 million plus illegal immigrants that have entered into our country. And the problem is we are not looking at, we're not vetting them. Many of them we have seen. They are members of MS-13. They were on the FBI's most wanted list. I mean, these are the people that we're letting in our communities to be around our children, really. And so we have to make sure that our border is secure so that small businesses can be secure, so that our communities and families can be secure as well.
And it's not just from South America. We're seeing from people come across the border through Mexico, from China, from Afghanistan, from countries that really don't like us all that much. So we really need to know who's coming across the border. I mean, it's interesting to see these Chinese nationals kind of well-dressed walking across the border, pulling suitcases. That's the most interesting part is like they're well-dressed. They don't look like they've trekked far. And they've got their fancy suitcases full of their stuff.
Yeah, it seems like there's a double standard too, because, when you go through to get on a plane, right, you have to go through all this kind of security and, if you have TSA pre-check and all these things, where is that security, the vetting and looking at the documents of the illegal immigrants that are coming in? There is nothing. And we're putting our communities and our families at risk by doing that.
Now, to be clear, we're not saying they were anti-immigrant. I just want to make sure people understand that. I mean, my parents are immigrants. Mary, your parents were immigrants. So obviously we're not anti-immigrant, or you and I wouldn't be here today. But both of our parents, sets of parents, did it legally. And, there is the right way and the wrong way to do it. Some folks are trying to come over here for a better life. But, unfortunately, as you've said, we do have rules in this country for a reason. I always like kind of making the analogy. It's kind of like your house, right? I mean, I think every single person in Congress probably has locks on their doors, and they probably lock their doors during the day because they just don't want anybody wandering into their house. And but it seems as though that's what we have. We have people just wandering to our house because the locks aren't on. And so I think everybody would be very uncomfortable with that idea. And so I think we're just asking at this point, right, that we do something to secure our borders because it really is impacting our community. And I always like kind of separating the porous border issue into two issues. There's the immigration issue, but I always really focus on the criminality. That's where I have the biggest problem because that's impacting every single one of our communities now, whether it is from, migrant crime, whether it's from the impact on resources. And so, it is something that, we've gone, I think, from it was like 2.5 million that entered the country in 2020 to over 7.5 to 8 million folks illegally. That's a really big drain in our economy and our country. And, there is a point you cross where you just start maxing out, the benevolence and generosity of a country. And I think we're well beyond that.
Yeah, and I think an important point too is that you have to look at the fentanyl that's coming in. I mean, this is devastating our communities, killing millions of Americans, and it's coming through the porous border, whether it's from Mexico or China, wherever it's coming from. It has drastically, hit our small towns and big cities too. And it's just, it's very, very sad. We're seeing many of our children dying because of the fentanyl, many others dying. And so that's another major problem in addition to, the crime. I mean, illegal drug use is obviously a crime too, but that's having huge impacts on our families and our communities.
Yeah, gun trafficking, human trafficking, and drug trafficking, three main issues are coming through the porous border. And look, I mean, we know where the fentanyl is coming from. It's, the Chinese and a lot of these, Venezuelan cartels and stuff like that. I mean, they really are working hand in hand. And it's really unfortunate. So it's, for us, it's a big issue, a big deal to get into this issue. But I think it's impacting so many of our communities and our small businesses. I don't think we have a choice but to get involved in this issue.
No, absolutely. Small businesses are being impacted by the crime, the fentanyl. I mean, small business owners, heard some of them are even uncomfortable staying in their stores because of the level of crime that's out there. And that's just a sad state of affairs for our country.
Yeah. Employers, the employees, the owners, I mean, the customers don't want to come in. It really is sad. So we'll see where it takes us, I guess.
Well, I don't see this as a political issue, a party issue. I see it based on the cities and the residents of these cities that are being impacted by the illegal immigrants. I see people of all stripes and all political parties speaking out that this is not sustainable, and so that's interesting to me. Is they're starting to see that backlash. But as we know, there are members of Congress who have their own security details, but not everybody does. And even some of our members of Congress have experienced some of the crime in D.C. I know Congressman Henry Cuellar himself was carjacked. Carjacking is a big issue in Washington, D.C., and he experienced it firsthand himself. So, it's easy to watch people say, well, the whole not in my backyard, if it's not happening to me, it's not that big of a problem, but it was right there. I mean, he experienced it himself firsthand.
Absolutely. And our nation's capital has really gone downhill with regard to crime. And many of the businesses are shuttering because they can't afford to stay open because of the crime. So it's really sad that, we have these wonderful buildings and monuments, the Constitution, all these historic, the National Archives, wonderful museums. But, people are wanting to visit them less and less because of the crime that's out there. It's just simply not safe right now. And that has to change. It's our nation's capital.
Well, Mary, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters, America's Small Business Megaphone. I also want to thank you for coming over to the JCN family. We're so excited to have you here. And I want to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to us today. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network, and new episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. And we'll see you next time.